Hello and welcome. I am so glad you could join us today. I hope you're having a wonderful day. If it is a character building day, I will make it as awesome as it should be. You are listening to the Motivation Monday Power Hour. I am your host, Motivated Mike. Today's topic is thinking. How do we think? How do we make decisions? Think of a decision you have made in the past week or so. Maybe it was deciding what to have for dinner. Maybe it was deciding to buy a product. Maybe it was just deciding how to spend your free time. How did you make that decision? Now, of course, your first answer would be, with logic, of course. But that just isn't quite true. Most decisions are made subconsciously, based off of feeling. What do you think about this? That question, what do you think about this, quickly becomes, how do you feel about this? Now, for thinking, we have two systems of thinking, and I'll refer to them as System 1 and System 2. System 1 is fast. It makes assumptions, comes to conclusions quickly, without much thought. System 2 is more of a slow thinking. It requires detail, it requires attention, it requires focus. It takes time out of your day. Now, System 1 is automatic, influential, and quick. Let me give you an example of that. Suppose I ask, what is 2 plus 2? Doesn't take much thought, does it? It's 4. You can come to the answer without even thinking about it. But System 2 requires mental energy. For example, what is 17 times 24? See, think about that for a minute. You gotta focus your energy. You might even have to get a piece of paper out, start writing down some numbers. It's not an easy question. The answer is 408, by the way. I wrote that down. But System 1 responses, they're quick, they're assumptions, they're based off how we feel, how familiar we are with something. But they vary between people. This was pretty interesting to me. They vary between person and person. So two different people, when they come across a different situation, they will behave differently based off how they feel about it. And System 2 can be disrupted and distracted. It includes self-control and rule following. These two systems are quite interesting, but they can come into conflict too. And when they do, is usually when you find something that is an illusion of truth. This is a very, very big one these days, an illusion of truth. Most people, you can go on for a long time without even recognizing what the truth is until one day you just think about it long enough and you kind of have that aha moment. And this happens because System 1 often takes over because we're lazy. We're wired to be lazy, and that's okay in this context, of course. And this is how we get incorrect assumptions about the state of reality, the System 1 and System 2 thought processes of thinking. Now, the truth, it is what is actually there. It can be very difficult to determine what the truth is. I was reading one blog post the other day online. It was written by Scott Adams. I don't know if you know Scott Adams, but he's the guy who wrote Dilbert, the comic. Dilbert, yeah. But he also does this blog, and he talks about psychology, and he also talks a lot about politics, and it's pretty interesting opinions that he has. I enjoy it greatly, and you might too. But anyway, the other day, he said that if one person sees a pink elephant, they are delusional. That's fair to say, right? But if everyone sees it, then it must be real. So that's the kind of world that we're living in. But all it takes is for one person to not see the elephant, for it to just be proven as untrue and a delusion. Now let's go back to truth for a minute. I'm going to come back to that elephant example in a minute. But how do we determine what is actually true? Well, you might say, Well, I determine what is true by personal experience. All right, that's valid. Or you might say, I determine it by the experiences of people that I know. Okay, again. Or you might say, I determine what is true based off expert opinions. Okay, that's an interesting one. What else do you decide is true? Well, what has scientific studies to back it up? Very fair. And then some people say, oh, common sense, of course. Another interesting answer. And lastly, we know what is true based off patterns, what we see happen repeatedly. Now let's think about all the flaws that can be in this list of 6 different ways that you can know what's true. Now the first one, personal experience. Human perception is questionable. I don't know if you realize this or not, but sometimes what we think we see and what we actually see are 2 very different things. The experience of other people we know, that's even less reliable. And then we have experts on the list. Let me tell you about experts. They work for money, folks. They work for money. Keep that in mind. Just whenever you think about using an expert opinion to decide what is true. In scientific studies, this one we get an interesting one. This is true in some papers, but not others. But you got to realize that correlation is not causation. You could relate 2 random sets of data, maybe with an equation. It's very possible. It happens quite often in the scientific world, unfortunately. But just because things are correlated does not necessarily mean that there's causation present, that one of the numbers is what is causing the other number. You can find plenty of examples of this online. There are some pretty funny correlations that you can find. But back to this. So common sense, the 5th one on my list. This is what's funny about common sense. It allows us to be wrong with complete confidence. Complete confidence, folks. We can be wrong with complete confidence. And let's be honest, we are not entirely self-aware. Sometimes we don't know why we prefer X over Y. We don't know why we do things all the time, and that's just normal. There's no way to know everything about ourselves. It's very difficult. But common sense, folks, be careful of it. It allows us to be wrong with complete confidence. And last on the list, patterns. This one is probably the closest to the truth that we can actually get. But it does come at a cost. There is some problems. With patterns, we got to ask ourselves, is it a coincidence or is it a personal bias? That's very valid. Sometimes it might just be a coincidence. Sometimes we might just be biased, and confirmation bias takes care of the rest, and we never catch ourselves on it. So I'm going to refer back to this pink elephant. So these pink elephants are just the truths that we fail to see and the delusions that we accept as true. That being said, I'm going to give you a few examples that I took from politics. There's a lot of pink elephants in politics. It's just, the examples are so numerous, there's so many of them, it's incredible. Let me give you an example of this. And I'm going to be neutral on this too. I understand some of my listener base may not prefer one candidate or the other. Maybe they're voting for Jill Stein. But for now, I'm just going to point out some facts here. So a while ago, there was a rumor going around that the WikiLeaks email allegedly said that Hillary hates everyday Americans. Now, do you think this is actually true? So I actually looked up the email, and this is what it said in context, folks. I'm not saying you should vote for Hillary, but this is what it said in context. In context, she said she hated the label everyday Americans. That is quite the difference. Another rumor that's going around is that Trump is a puppet of the Russian government. I mean, come on, this is This isn't very believable. There isn't much evidence to support this. I mean, it's a pink elephant, folks. That's what it is. Here's another one on my list. Clinton had several political opponents killed, allegedly. Once again, not very believable. I don't think it's true. Maybe it is. Maybe I'm wrong. I am wrong often, but I mean, this is pretty far-fetched. And you got to assume that half of what you hear is true these days. That's about the odds of it being true if you hear it. And if it doesn't make sense, it probably isn't true. That's a general rule of thumb, but that's not always the case. There are some things that don't make sense and are true, like thermodynamics or calculus. But here's probably the biggest pink elephant in politics right now, as far as I can tell. They say Trump is secretly racist / Hitler. It's like, oh my goodness. Everyone 30 years ago was probably racist by today's standards. And apart from being very little evidence to support this claim, I mean, we improve over time. And the elephant that we see is usually just our confirmation bias taking over. We just see things, and without really looking into them, we just jump to the conclusion and say, aha, that's it, right there. And let's see, I also wrote down a few more of these that just had no evidence, that are just total pink elephants. Some people believe them, most, I assume, do not. I mean, some of these are pretty outrageous. Like, for example, this one, Clinton is secretly a lesbian. What? Where's your evidence for that? You have nothing to support that. Or on the other hand, they say, oh, Trump is a homophobe. And it's like, what? Where's the evidence? There's none of it. I guess they're trying to go for the repetition, so then we kind of believe it over time if we hear it enough. It's kind of sad, but that's how it works. But back to my point, though. Assume that half of what you hear is true. That's about what it is. And pattern recognition, again. The past can provide insight, but it doesn't dictate the future with 100% certainty. For example, if you buy a stock in the stock market, sure, maybe it looked great on paper and it was going up and up and up, but that doesn't necessarily guarantee that it's going to continue going up and up by any means. So anyway, the pink elephant, that's a few examples of it. So back to the question, how do we make decisions? How does System 1 make the decisions? Association, that's the first way. Just by saying words like old, frail, cautious, and aging, you can make people walk slower for no logical reason, other than just by putting that in their mind. When I read that, I was pretty amazed. I mean, just all the possibilities. What if we just kept telling ourselves that we are unstoppable, that we will accomplish this, that we will make things happen? The possibilities are endless. And we have the symbolic reminder of this. We have a symbolic reminder. We can pretend that we are a superhero and that a video camera is literally following us everywhere. This is what I use. I like to live my life as if I'm the hero in my own movie. I imagine the cameras rolling. I imagine them following me. When I need motivation, I ask myself, do I want those cameras to capture me wasting time? Or do I want them to capture me getting incredible things done, lifting incredible amounts of weight? I want the cameras to picture me being unstoppable. And there's also the illusion of truth in our life. If we tell somebody two truths in a row and follow it with a lie, the lie will be much more likely to be believed. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not telling you to go lie. But just be careful with what others tell you. We have an illusion of memory as well. This is why I ask, if you are bringing good things back from the past or you're clinging to bad things in the past. Last week a couple weeks ago, I told that story about in the happiness episode. I asked the audience, the good mining engineer brings gold into the office. The bad mining engineer brings dirt into the office. And we're just going to pretend that the pit that they're digging out of is the past. Are you bringing back the gold, or are you bringing back the dirt from the past? And I read a great quote by Alan Watts the other day, and he said, "You have no obligation to be who you were 5 minutes ago. You can let go of the past so that you can grow." And another interesting fact, for a written message to be perceived as more believable, increase the color contrast. See, if you have red words on yellow paper, it's not as effective as if you have black words on white paper. You're probably saying, but Michael, everything is in black ink anyway. Fair enough. Then I'm just going to tell you, use simple sentences. Simple sentences are a lot quicker to be believed. And write it like poetry. If it rhymes, people will be more likely to believe it and remember it. I'll give you one example of it that I've heard this election season. Hillary lied, people died. It's catchy, isn't it? It may not be true or not. I don't know. But it is catchy. And once you hear it often, it kind of gets stuck in your mind, right? It's crazy how that happens. Another example, woes unite foes. It just sticks to your mind. You just remember it. You also have to make your message easy to pronounce. This is a big one. If things are easy to pronounce, they're easy to repeat. I don't know if you've been watching Trump recently, but he said, he used to say, our politicians are incompetent, but then he shortened it to, our politicians are stupid. Why would he dumb down the message like that? Because it's easier to remember, and we're more likely to repeat it and remember it. If writing is hard to read, we will spend more time focusing on it as well. Different fonts can be an advantage in this kind of game. I mean, if you have Times Roman numeral or Arial and then you just switch to something really difficult to read, people will spend time and focus in on that. And because they spent that time on it, they'll be more likely to remember. And of course, we think differently when we're happy and when we're unhappy. Happiness can throw off our thinking. When we are unhappy, we lose System 1 thinking. And I'm not saying that we should be unhappy. When we are happy, we lose System 2 thinking. This is very interesting. So is it better to be unhappy? That's not quite what I'm saying. I'm saying that when we are overwhelmed with joy, to stop and just think about our decisions a little more carefully. It's better to prevent irrational behavior before it takes place. And now, let's talk about norms and surprises. What other people have a profound impact in our environment, and so does context of any message. For example, I'll ask you this question. How many animals did Moses have on his ark? Think about it. You're probably thinking, 2, right? 2! Immediately. And then you think, wait a second. It was Noah in that story, not Moses. But jumping to conclusions, it happens quickly. Without us even realizing it, we have jumped into a conclusion. And then confirmation bias makes us believe that these things are real. It creates the pink elephant that I mentioned earlier. I mean, you see a pink shirt in the corner of your room, oh, it must be a pink elephant. It's like, no, step back for a minute. Let's step back and think about this. System 1 is building imaginary evidence. System 2 can rip it down. It's where the conflict rips down the pink elephant. And here's another example. Let's just say I have a friend, and I tell you, oh yeah, he's a great friend. He's very friendly. What will you look for in that person? You will look for evidence that he is a friendly person, and you will find it. Or if I said, oh yeah, meet my friend. He's sometimes pretty cold and unfriendly. Then what are you going to focus on? You're going to nitpick these very small, very tiny things and use it as evidence to support the idea that they're unfriendly. And you got to be careful of this, because it happens without us even realizing it. Before we even know it, we have these beliefs. We don't even know why, and we haven't stopped to check. Now, we'll move on to a few examples of irrational thinking caused by System 1. A few more. I wrote down a few good ones here. Probably my favorite one is the halo effect. You can read whole books on this topic. This is a great topic. Beautiful people are viewed as smarter. Think about that. Beautiful people are perceived as smarter. It just happens. We assume good things about people if they are beautiful. They are even less likely to be convicted in court for most types of crimes. Most types of crimes. Not every type, but most. Now, the exception is when the crime involves manipulation, ironically. Then the ugly people have the advantage of getting off more times. So if you're ugly out there, you have an advantage, don't worry. And we also have the clustering illusion. So when we have small samples of data, we have extremes more often. That's called the law of small numbers. Random distributions will not appear random. Think about this. Keep in mind these ideas when somebody gives you a statistic. Let me just give you an example so that you kind of have an idea of what I'm talking about. So if I say 9 out of 10 dentists agree, I mean, I'm sure we've all heard that commercial. 9 out of 10 dentists agree. And it's like, what? You've only asked 10 dentists this question? I mean, 9 out of 10 might agree on anything. There isn't enough a sample size there to support a good statistic. For example, I suppose you may not believe me, but what if I went to the coal mining professors at CSM and I asked them about global warming? Think about this for a second. If I go up to these coal mining professors, it's in their best interest not to allow global warming anywhere. So they're going to say, oh, 2/3 of us do not believe in global warming. And then I could generalize that and say, see, 2/3 of CSM professors do not believe in global warming. See how that can get blown out of proportion? Another idea, it's anchoring. This is a crazy idea. When I first read this, I was just kind of blown away by this. If a number is heard, we will gravitate to it. Let me give you an example. Do you think Ben Franklin was older or younger than 40 when he died? Think about that. What would you have guessed if I didn't say 30 or 40? You might say, I don't know, maybe he lived till 60, but then since I said 40, you might think about that for a little while and we'll be like, well, maybe he was 45 when he died. I don't know. And the real answer is 84 years old. Let me give you another example. Do you think the moon is more or less than 1 million square miles? Think about it for a minute. More or less than 1 million. See, most people would have no idea. The 1 million is a reference number that they will use to just direct their judgment. The answer is 14 million. Very different. So you can't let these numbers fool you, these anchors that we cling to. And that's my point on that. We also have the availability cascade. People believe what they hear often, even if it is overrepresented. So, for example, in the news, we hear a lot of stories about people being killed by assault rifles. Well, do assault rifles or handguns kill more people? based off what you hear from the news, you might be quick to think, well, assault rifles probably take out so many people. I have no idea, but I'd assume it would be assault rifles. But the truth is funnier than that. Since assault rifles are so overrepresented, handguns actually kill far, far, far more people. Like upwards of 90% last time I checked the statistics. And that's on the other side of that is all rifles. So this was pretty baffling to me when I heard this. But we got to be careful, because what we hear often ends up what gets stuck in our mind. We get another case of the emotional tail wagging the rational dog. And we have the representativeness heuristic. We expect what we think. Let me give you an example. Maybe you say, oh, there's no way she's going to win this basketball game. She will not win because she does not look like a winner. Have you ever made these overgeneralizations of someone and then just been surprised when you find out the truth? It really is quite interesting, isn't it? I'll give you one example. There was one person who always was sleeping in class, was always late to class, and in my mind I was like, oh, they must be a poor student because they're lazy. That was my first impression. That was what I picked up. That's what my just biases told me in my mind. And then I found out a little more detail. Found out that they were working 40 hours a week and had all these other responsibilities. They weren't lazy at all. They were probably working just as hard, if not harder than me. So, I mean, just be careful what you expect versus what is actually there. I mean, what we expect sometimes just takes over, and it's unfortunate, but it does happen. And it happens to save us time when we're thinking, too. It's an evolutionary advantage, but it still can have negative implications. And let me tell you another interesting thought. Positivity is the best reinforcement. Many people, when I tell them this, they're like, that's garbage. That's not true at all. Many people do not believe it, though. An example is when they have an employee, for example. So they do terribly. And what happens? They tell them to do better. They tell them off. And then you know what happens? They get better at their job. But this is a fallacy. This is very short-sighted. They are statistically unlikely to do any worse than they have done that day. I mean, think about that. If you do a terrible job and it's the worst day you've had at work in a year, let's say, I mean, what are the odds that the next day is going to be worse than that day? Maybe every day of that week is almost guaranteed to be better than that day. Statistically, you're going to regress to the mean. But when you view this, confirmation bias takes over, of course, and you're like, oh, they're obviously doing better because I told them off. Well, no, not quite the case. But you see, when you compliment what they do well, that's how you get their average daily performance to go up over time. Of course, when you compliment them on these days that they just do a one in a year great job, of course the next day they're unlikely to do that same quality of work. But the best you can do is just try and raise their average over a long period of time. That is the regression to the mean. Very interesting, though. Let me talk a little bit about another bias here. We have the planning fallacy. Planning fallacy. Things take more time than what we would expect. Some things we might plan, oh yeah, that'll take one afternoon, and then it ends up taking like 3 or 4 days. This happens to me all the time. I mean, it's just natural to think that you'll just persevere through it and get it done so quickly. It'll be no problem at all. You can do it immediately. And then we let ourselves down, and we tend to get kind of depressed about this. I think this is one of the reasons that a lot of people are depressed. That they set such high expectations for themselves, and then they can't reach it. But you know what? We overestimate what we can do in 1 week, and we underestimate what we can do in 10 years. Now, these people who are depressed, do you ever ask them, hey, what's your plan for the next 10 years? I mean, they look at you like you're crazy. They didn't think that far ahead. They don't know what they're going to be doing in 10 years. But if you ask them what they want to get done next week and then just see how much they actually get done, the difference is quite astounding. They're overestimating what they can do, and it's good to have high goals and miss them, but you shouldn't get depressed about it, and you should always remember that life is long. We have maybe even 10, 20, might have in excess of those years. I don't know. But don't overestimate what you can do in 1 week and then get stressed and give up. You have time. Relax, take a deep breath in and out. Try not to worry about it too much. It will work out for you. I guarantee it. And I'll give you another example here. We have the sunk cost fallacy. Now, how many people have heard about this in economics, the sunk cost? Quite a lot of people, right? But the sunk cost fallacy. If things happen in the past, it is irrational to take it into consideration now. Let me give you an example of this. Over the summer when I was coming to mines, I was like, I'm going to need a bike. So, of course, I had two options. I decided, I have a bike in the garage. It's pretty old. It's not the best. I could fix it up and then bring it. Or I could just buy a new bike, right? Two options. And I thought about it for a while and said, how much would it cost to actually fix this bike? So I went to the bike shop, asked them how much it would cost to fix, and they gave me a reasonable number. They were like, we could tune this and have it up ready to go for, I don't know, maybe it was $40. And I was like, all right, that's lower than the cost of a new bike. A new bike might cost me hundreds. So, of course, I said, all right, let's do that. And they tuned it up. They tried to fix it. And do you know what happened? The bike still wasn't up to working condition. The gears kind of skipped, so the bike needed replacement parts. So after I spent this money, then I was like, all right, how much are the gears? And then it's like, another $60. And I was like, this is starting to add up. You know how that goes, right? So the small costs, they keep adding up over time. And then before we know it, we're like, we should have just bought a new bike. And we just get stuck in that way of thinking. Keep going with that way of thinking. And it's terrible. It's a very terrible way of thinking because that happened in the past. We can't recover the money that we spent for just tuning the bike. That's gone. It's spent. It's non-existent anymore. But anyway, that's my point to this one. Just be aware that things that happen in the past should not affect what we do in the present. I suppose I'll give you another example of this. A lot of people, they say, I'm going to not go to the gym today because I worked out yesterday. And they keep using that excuse. And they go to the gym about once every 2 days because they use that excuse. You just think about it, and it gets so ridiculous, too. Keep coming up with these excuses about the past, and it's like, that's not a good reason not to go to the gym. Sure, you might need a rest day, fine. But if you just not go to the gym every day that you're just like, I worked out yesterday, all right, that's half a day's. Then you would say something like, I drank too much alcohol yesterday. There goes another few days. Before you know it, as soon as you go through all these excuses, you're at 0 days of gym time. You got to go to the gym a little bit. I mean, come on, you can't expect to get strong and get results if you don't go to the gym. But this fallacy, unfortunately, it happens all the time. Let me give you another example. Poor jobs. How many people do you know that are in dead-end jobs and they stick with it because they're like, maybe I'll get promoted to a better position in the company. And it's obvious they're not going anywhere. But they just think that all this past work, it means something to them. And in reality, it's the past. You can't take it back if you don't get the promotion. It just doesn't happen. You can't do it. It also happens in unhappy marriages. I mean, there are a lot of couples. I'm not telling you to get divorces. But there are a lot of unhappy couples who are delaying the inevitable just by thinking, they were so wonderful in the past, all this happened. And it's like, well, people change though. That's not who they are now. If you're truly unhappy and it's not going anywhere, you're not growing as a person by being in this relationship, maybe it's time to move on. I don't know. That's up to you. That's your call, not mine. But I just want you to think about that. Think about the sunk cost fallacy. And just, yeah. Another example is unpromising research. Maybe you have these research projects, and if they're going nowhere, you got to recognize it quickly and move on. I took a whole class on innovation. I've done a lot of research in new promising technologies. If something is not working, you have to move on. You can't just keep going on it and say, oh, but we spent $1 million researching this. If you're a big company, that might happen. And then later just realize, oh, we'll just continue it for another 10 million. And before you know it, you're so much money in the hole, it's ridiculous. It was just a waste. You just fell for the sunk cost fallacy instead of just moving on and going to better things. You got to realize that does happen. It happens all the time in research. This even happens in the mining industry too. Some of the times, some of the people, when they write about a project, they write these feasibility studies, these long, lengthy, 100-page documents. I mean, they spend a lot of time on this. But at the end of the day, if the project does not have merit, you can't mine it. You're going to lose money if you do. And trying to convince some of the writers of the document can be very, very difficult because they're emotionally invested in the property. They're emotionally invested in the project itself. And you got to be careful of this. You got to be careful not to hurt their feelings too. I mean, grudges, they stick around, unfortunately, and you got to just explain to them the sunk cost fallacy nice and easily. Try not to upset them too much, but explain to them that this project really does not have merit. We can't be done. It's not economic. But anyway, there are hundreds of examples of irrational thinking. Another example of it, something that I saw in myself the other day, was the moral credential effect. Now, what is the moral credential effect? It is the philosophy, oh, I did something good just now, so that justifies me in doing something less than good. Let me give you an example. If you go to the grocery store, the first thing you see is all the fruits and vegetables. That's the first thing you see is when you walk in. And stores know this moral credential effect quite well. That's why they put all the fruits and vegetables right in the front. But what happens? You see these fruits and vegetables, you think, oh goodness, I'm eating so healthy. And then you go to the junk food aisle and you just think, oh, if I'm eating this healthy, I can afford to eat unhealthy. So you load the cart up with junk food as well. That's how stores make their profit margin, folks. It's a very clever marketing ploy, and it works. It's tried and proven. But just keep this in mind, the moral credential effect. Whenever you see yourself making an excuse like, oh, I've done so well on my diet that I can afford to eat this piece of cake. No, don't do it. The cake is a lie. You're falling for the sunk cost fallacy in the form of this moral credential effect. It's a very, very big problem. Another thing that I've noticed with people, this one's pretty interesting, is there's an empathy gap. When people get excited, when you get people just overwhelmed with joy and excitement, they will behave very differently than when they're in a calm state. And these differences between these two states, they're pretty overwhelming too. You wouldn't believe the kind of just differences that you see as soon as you just start watching. Just open your eyes and just watch another person. You'll just be blown away. But you got to keep that in mind when you're planning for the future. If you think, oh, that won't happen, and you say it in a calm state, you gotta plan ahead and think, well, will it really not happen? Or will it happen because of my excited state? Because I'm thinking differently during the time that actually happened. It's something to think about. You have to think about it because it's It's interesting. It's interesting. Very, very interesting. But anyway, back to my point here. There are hundreds of examples of irrational thinking. I'll probably have another show in the future just to go over these. There are hundreds of them. If you go to the Wikipedia page, you can read all about them. They're really quite fascinating, though. But maybe I'll do another show if there's interest on some of these topics in the future. I don't want to bore you to death with psychology. But we must realize how we think if we ever want to improve. If we ever hope to become better, we must start with our own thoughts. See, the mind is like a garden. I already talked to you about habits. The mind is like a garden. If we plant weeds in the garden, it takes no effort to grow weeds. They will come without any effort. They'll just be there, and you'll have these negative thoughts. But if you take the time, if you plant flowers in the garden, if you plant trees, if you plant fruits and vegetables, you will grow positive things in your mind. It's an analogy. But habits, it's what makes us who we are. So keep that in mind. Watch yourself constantly. Look for the cues. Look for the routines. Look for the rewards that you give yourself after performing the routine. Maybe it's tangible. Maybe it's not. I don't know. Maybe it's just a feeling even. But anyway, back to... I got kind of off on a tangent there. Back to irrational thinking. You have to recognize how you think so that you may grow and improve. It must be done. You just have to do it. And that brings me to my book of the week. This book of the week, it's called Thinking, Fast and Slow. And it's written by Daniel Kahneman. And he's the winner of the Nobel Prize in Economics for these theories. He basically goes through and he has an entire section talking about economics and how our assumptions are sometimes just irrational. That in reality, we do not have people that do what is logical. We do things because we cannot explain them. That's just how it works. Like, for example, he said, well, there's the endowment effect that we don't account for in any of economics. It's the idea that if I own something, it's worth much more to me than it would be if I didn't own it and I was looking to buy it. There's that emotional value to it that we place on any item just because we have it. Very interesting, though. Very interesting read. But in this book, he goes all through psychology. He talks about the two systems of thinking. Very good stuff. He goes through the biases that we have. He just touches on them. He doesn't go through all of them, but he touches on a lot of the big ones. A lot of the big ideas that I shared today even. Very good book, though. He talks about overconfidence and what this means. How can we kind of overcome our own overconfidence biases? And he also talks about choices in economics. Anyway, great book. Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. So now I would like to turn it back over with my co-producer and discuss some of the local news. So, let me just dig up my notes here. And I got them. No worries, folks. First article that I chose was that national high school graduation rates are higher than ever. 83%, even more than 83%, of students are receiving their high school diplomas on time. Pretty inspirational, pretty good things.
Maybe.
Maybe? Why maybe?
Well, if the high schools are looking for lower standards, then maybe the students haven't changed it at all. The standards have just been lowered.
Ooh, you found a great possible bias to explain this explanation, you know. Like, we don't know. Maybe the truth is that they're just making it easier to get the degree.
Maybe.
I don't know. I haven't been to high school in about 4.5 years. So I really couldn't tell. Is that what is happening in your experience?
Well, I went to a private school, so it was a little different.
Ah, I see. Private school, big money. Wow. Yeah, I suppose that's very valid. Do you know the graduation rate at your private high school?
So far, it's been 100%.
Oh, well, see, maybe there's something to this.
Yeah, maybe it's private high schools. 100% graduation rate.
Maybe your private high school
Has very low standards.
has very low standards. Somehow I doubt it, but maybe. I don't know.
Maybe.
I don't know. I found that pretty interesting. The next story that we have. Oh, I'd also like to invite listeners to call in if you want to. The phone number is 303-273-3304. Those of you listening, I'll repeat that one more time. 303-273-3304. Give us a call and tell us what you think. All right, back to the news though. So in Detroit, they're building tiny homes that the homeless can rent to own. How cool is that? Think about
That seems pretty cool.
tiny homes.
I like it.
And they're also giving them out to seniors and college students. Because let's be
Nice.
honest, retiring is pretty expensive, and probably
Indeed.
the biggest expense is finding a place to live. But they're only 250 to 400 square feet. Can you imagine
Wow.
that?
That is pretty small. Jeez.
I know, that was... As much as I like the idea of the tiny house.
Hardly one room.
Yeah. I know mine's just kind of building one of these tiny houses for display kind of thing. And
Interesting.
I think it's even smaller than these, but very interesting though.
Indeed.
Kind of makes me wonder, where on earth are you going to put all your stuff if you get one of these?
I guess you just can't have much stuff.
Where do I put all my books even?
I have no idea.
I'd have to get PDFs of all of them. Very small, tiny houses though. But it does solve the question of the rising cost of housing. It provides a potential solution to that problem.
Tiny houses.
Yeah, definitely is a good thing to look into. Will it fix the problem totally? I don't know. Maybe. It might. If it did, that would be wonderful. Maybe everybody could get a home and everybody could afford a home.
That would be pretty cool.
That would be positive, yeah. Very good. So would you ever buy a tiny home?
Would I ever buy a tiny home? I mean, if I was without a house and only had enough to afford renting a tiny home, I think I'd do it. Get some shelter at least.
Last case scenario.
Pretty much.
So comparing it to living out of your car, it's one step above.
Maybe. I mean, I guess that depends on your car. If you have a car. I was thinking you have no car, no house, no
Ooh.
nothing.
You might be pretty desperate.
Yeah, exactly.
You might be willing to live in a box at that point.
That's true. But if you could get a tiny home, I'd prefer that to living in a box.
Very fair, very fair. And the next story we have, this one's a pretty funny one. I like to throw in a few funny ones just to kind of bring up the mood.
Oh, good.
A 102-year-old St. Louis woman checks arrested off of her bucket list.
How old was she?
102.
Wow. What did she get arrested for?
The article didn't say, so I'm
Ah.
assuming that it was just kind of like a charity on the police department side to kind of visit like lonely seniors and show them the police department.
Maybe.
But it was pretty funny. She got to ride in the back of a police car and everything, and she crossed it off of her bucket list.
Good for her. Getting it done.
So now I have to ask, is getting arrested on your bucket list?
I don't think getting arrested has ever been on my bucket list. Yeah.
Kind of hesitated there. You're kind of like, well, maybe there are a few things on my bucket list that I could be arrested for.
Well, there are certainly
I don't
things
know.
on the bucket list that I could be arrested for. I
Ooh,
mean,
you should share these.
I wasn't thinking anything in particular. I was more thinking things I've done that I could be arrested for.
Have you made a lot of mistakes in your youth?
I wouldn't call them mistakes. I'd say I weighed the costs and benefits and the potential costs.
Putting
and
that
the
private
benefits.
education to work.
Exactly. Using the logical side of my brain.
Oh, jeez. Well, if you can justify it, right? There's no way that could be wrong.
Exactly.
All right. Where were we? Oh, yeah. She also had a few quotes in there that were pretty inspirational.
Oh, good.
And she sews handmade clothing for other seniors to keep them from getting lonely. And she also socializes with them.
Nice.
So shout out to Eddie Sims, that's her name. And probably my favorite quote in the whole article. It's a great world if you open your eyes and look at it. Let me repeat
Nice.
that for those of you who are kind of zoned out. It is a great world if you open your eyes and look at it. Very inspirational, though. So, I encourage you to pursue your goals, cross things off your bucket list. Obviously, if they go against the law, probably just hold off on those. Don't be like, I'm doing these things off my bucket list because Motivated Mike inspired me to do so. Don't need that. That's okay. Hold off on that, though. And here's another article. This one I thought was hilarious. So this woman, she's suing KFC for $20 million, not pieces of chicken, $20 million over false advertising.
Wow. How are they falsely advertising?
This is what it was all about. In the commercial, you see the bucket of chicken, right? And it's flowing the top with chicken, it's overflowing. And they advertise, you can feed the whole family with this. And she's saying, no, you may not feed the whole family with this. This bucket is half empty.
Wow. I guess it depends on your family size.
Could you imagine if she won, though? Just like the whole half empty concept.
Yeah. It's ridiculous.
We could start going out and could sue tire companies for having a tire that's mostly empty.
Mostly airspace.
We could sue the potato chip companies for giving us bags of chips that have mostly air in them. Of course, we live in the mountains, so the oxygen expands a little bit. So
That's
we have
true.
a little extra air than they do in the lowlands. So I don't know if that's true in the lowlands. But when we open chip bags, it's full of air. it's funny. Probably keeps them from getting crushed. So there's probably logic behind it. But
It's probably a good thing.
yeah, probably overall, pretty good thing.
It's probably easier to get them out of the package when there's air in there as compared to a vacuum-packed package of chips.
I don't think it's true for the bucket of chicken, though.
Yeah. Jeez.
I don't know. I wish her luck. We'll see if the lawsuit goes anywhere. But
We'll see.
yeah, investing your own money to pursue righteousness. I admire it, even though I
To-
don't know if it'll pan out.
I'm not sure if it's pursuing righteousness as much as making an investment.
Maybe in the future we could sue politicians for their claims that they don't act on.
Maybe
sure
you've
we
just
all-
inspired someone out there.
Yeah, I'm sure we all just pointed out all the things about politicians. Like, are they actually going to do that? And then we could just compare. And I know over the past couple of years, it's been like, nope, that didn't happen. That didn't happen. Probably one of the biggest one was probably when Obama 8 years ago was like, adding new debt is unpatriotic.
Sure.
And then meanwhile, it's like, well, that didn't go down a dime.
No.
that just gone up exponentially even.
Indeed.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see no matter who gets elected what happens in the next 4, maybe 8 years. Probably 8 years.
Should be exciting to say the least.
Oh yeah, I'm hoping it will be. Just keep me alive and interested in politics. But anyway, that's about all I have in today's topic. So, I hope you have been inspired. And that concludes today's show. And the next show is on Monday at 4. And the topic will be, I haven't quite decided the topic yet.
Okay.
It's either going to be relationships or meditation. Good topics.
Should be interesting.
Yeah, relationships, I'm just planning on talking about just how we connect with people, how we communicate with people. I know as engineers that's probably one of the biggest struggles we have, is effectively communicating with people. And on the other hand, I have meditation, which might be an interesting topic. In the next 2 weeks I'll do both of them, but this next one I know what I'll do. And I'll tell you how to achieve the Zen, find the Zen in your life. And, oh yeah, and If you miss any episodes or would like to hear them again, you can find them on YouTube. I know I've been pretty slow to upload them on YouTube as of recently, and promise I'll upload a few more soon, the next week. And don't sue me if I don't. But the channel name is Motivated Mike. Stay wise, my friends. Motivated Mike, out.